Hey, I'm Koi. About a year ago, I decided to pursue one of my long-lost dreams, that is, drawing. I drew for fun when I was a kid, but I've never pursued it or done any sort of art studies, that is, until last year. This journey has been a roller coaster filled with both the joy and pain of learning art, and I'll share with you my study methods and experience throughout the journey, and hopefully you can learn from my mistakes or take inspiration from my journey. My entire 365 days journey hinged on the very crucial first 2 weeks. So at first, I just wanted to draw for fun and make memes. I did a bunch of things, learning to draw eyes, copying faces, and figure drawings, what have you. And then there's day 7, technically my very first artwork. Let's be honest, it's terrible. But strangely, this one is kinda special to me because I've had the idea of making this stupid meme for weeks, and that actually got me to sit down and learn drawing. After years of just imagining, man, I wish I could draw. And then 1 week later, after 14 hours of drawing, on day 14, I made this art. Now, this one has an extra special place in my heart. Objectively, it's not the best, but back then, I was absolutely mind blown. I felt really satisfied when I finished this, and this made me believe that I can learn art. And that's when I decided to take this a bit more seriously. So I set a simple structure for my journey. In a week, I spent around 4 to 5 days for studies, 1 to 2 days to create at least one artwork, and 1 day for rest and review. Disclaimer, because I'm a self-learned artist, I might not use the proper terminologies to explain stuff, so good luck. In the next 2 months, I studied a mishmash of topics. Mindset-wise, I follow a simple cycle. Aim to learn something, learn with daily studies, test myself with weekly artwork, review the result, and then decide what to learn next. Here's a compilation. Head studies that includes face, eyes and hair, shapes and perspective studies, gesture studies, figure studies, hand studies, background study, 9 artworks, and 1 feet study. You might have noticed that I don't actually do a lot of fundamental practices. Why? I heard that if you start with your fundamentals, you can learn more efficiently. Trust me, I believe that. But listen, I know what kind of person I am. If I have to draw a gajillion lines and boxes before I get to draw anything I like, I know for sure I lose my motivation and possibly my mind and just stop drawing altogether. I don't know about you, but to me, that doesn't sound efficient nor fun. So I just studied what I wanted to study and slipped in fundamentals practices whenever I felt like it. I'd rather half-ass things and keep going than trying to be an efficient learning machine that quit because I got bored. Remember, half-ass is better than no ass. Anyway, I've done these studies in the first 2 months to learn the basics of drawing characters, but one glaring weakness that I wanted to study first was colors. And that led me to my next milestone, which doesn't only change my perspective on coloring, but also motivated me to learn a second art style. In my attempt to understand colors, I stumbled upon another concept that I didn't even know existed. That concept is values. Values is basically how light or dark a color is. I started with these studies using photos for reference, and then I also tried following Picat's tutorial on YouTube to basically use movie screenshots for references. It was great, and I actually enjoyed doing these studies. I tried using a limited set of values to focus on grouping these values into big shapes instead, but I wasn't really sure how light or dark I should go. And I do think my value groupings could have been simpler as well. I was distracted by too many details. Next, I wanted to try something else. I still studied value, but this time referencing John Singer Sargent's painting. And to get myself out of my comfort zone, I decided to try out painting instead of drawing. I've always been fascinated by painters. Problem is, I didn't even know how to start painting. It seems like magic to me, but instead of just overthinking on how to do it, I decided to just jump right in. In hindsight, this was a great introduction to painting because I'm only working with black and white, and that's one less variable to think about, which is colors. On day 63, to kick myself out of my comfort zone even more, while copying another Sargent's painting, I did this gauntlet challenge. So the challenge is to draw with one brush, one layer, no undo, and no erase. The point of this challenge is for you to think first before stroking your brushes, instead of just frantically drawing and spamming Ctrl-Z. And for a chronic Ctrl-Z enjoyer, it was hellish. I legit had to unbind my undo key for this. But I was kind of surprised with the result, because it turned out better than what I expected. To be honest, it was too complex for my tiny infant brain, and I'm not sure if I had internalized what I learned right away. But at least now I know, and it also opened my mind towards the process of painting. At around the 3rd month, I attempted a few bouts of master studies. I didn't really feel like doing this too early because I don't have enough skill and insight to break down master artists' artworks. I started with copy studying this Dino's illustration of Frieren. I really like the way he colors his illustrations, but I don't understand. It's too big brain to me. So to test if I learned anything, I drew my own Angie Fern here. Next, I copied 2-6's illustration of Kafka from Honkai Star Rail. His illustration is very rough and expressive. It seems like there's a lot of details, but then you zoom in and it's all an illusion. I learned that apparently this is a real concept, and it's a great way to add a lot of details without actually drawing them. But to me, it's just straight up black magic. Lastly, I copy studied Ask Zia's illustration of Eresh from FGO. The line art is very loose and not rigid, ? I don't know how to describe it, and the shapes and composition feel very soft and elegant. But personally, I like the colors the most. While I think I managed to copy this okay-ish, I don't think I quite grasped the colors. Now before I move on, I have to warn you. Something very dangerous happened when I did these studies. See, I was blown away by my studies. I genuinely thought, holy crap, I'm such a great artist. But then I realized, wait a minute, this is just a copy. The original artists have made all the important decisions, so of course the copy looks good. The real challenge is applying what I learned to my own art. Knowing these concepts is one thing, understanding them, and then applying them to my own art is way more difficult. Around day 100, I attempted to redraw this character that I drew on day 1 and 7. Keeping in mind the master studies I did, I'd also inspired by this piece by Azzie. I struggled a lot with her hair, and also getting the pattern on her toga right. This is why I think it's so difficult to apply concepts that I learned from studies. When drawing these characters, on top of trying to apply the new concepts that I had learned, my mind is preoccupied with staying faithful to the original design and figuring out how everything would look from a different perspective. In the end, it's not really horrible, but I don't really like this one. And that led me to experience the very wonderful, amazing, awesome feeling that is Burnout. Side note, it's not really my first Burnout. I had one earlier around day 60ish, but I'm gonna talk about it now. Just like any artist, I want to make something that's good. But for a while now, I feel like I haven't made anything like that. This really made me think that maybe I'm just not cut out for this. And honestly, I almost quit the journey here. But I have developed a masterful gambit against burnout, and I'm going to share this top secret big brain gambit with you now. You see, every time I get burned out, I just stopped drawing. I skipped my weekly art and just sketched or doodled or fun or just not draw at all. And here's what's interesting. Every time after I do this, I get what I consider the best sketches I've done in my journey. These are what I sketched when I was feeling burned out. I really like the way these turned out, and maybe it was thanks to the fact that I was just sketching without expecting it to be good. I wasn't trying to achieve anything, frantically trying to make my art look a certain way, or, for better or worse, fussing over staying faithful to the original design and style. I was just expressing my ideas. In the end, these two are special because ironically, these burnout illustrations gave me a huge boost in motivation and encouraged me to keep going. Maybe that's the secret to art. Just get burned out first. Anyway, after that boost in motivation, I went on what I considered the training arc. As I tried to progress through my beginner phase, I realized that there's a slope. I have already studied the basics of drawing things that I wanted to draw, so there really aren't as many new things to learn as before. Now it's all about deepening the skills and knowledge that I've learned and practicing to instill them to my art making process. So I practiced materials, backgrounds, face angles, facial expressions. I did this 100 hands in 10-hour challenge to celebrate reaching 1,000 subs. Big f***ing mistake. Another ass study, croquette study, painting again, and a bunch of figure studies. I also explored more workflows when drawing my weekly artworks. I tried to color with the painting workflow, and then I studied Mai Yoneyama. But what I consider my next milestone is this GG art from day 148. So one of my biggest sins that I still have even now, by the way, is being a massive zoomer. Zooming in way too much and way too early. Number one, it's inefficient because you're making changes that are too small that might not even be visible when you look at the canvas as a whole. Number two, it's hard to proportion things properly when you can't see the whole thing. On that day, however, somehow I ascended. I managed to stay zoomed out and kept everything loose. Maybe Gigi's insanity helped me get into the right mindset. This illustration is so messy when you zoom in, but when you zoom out, you don't really notice them. And overall, I think I expressed my idea quite nicely. Before I go on to the next milestone, I'ma go through the next few weeks quickly. This one got a lot of engagement, but let's be real. This is not that good. I think I made better art than this, and they have less engagement. So that's when I learned social media engagement by itself, emphasis on by itself, it's not a good measure of skill or artistry, or it's not enough. And I thought about that a lot because measuring skill is actually important to me at this point because I want to be aware whether I'm improving or not. I personally like this one, which was my first attempt at splash art style illustrations, but I struggle a lot trying to structure the perspective and interior of the train, and also drawing Doobie in perspective. I really like the light shining from the top here, but if I were to improve this, I'd make the background a bit simpler. I followed the splash art style study with this. I really like the composition, and learning from the Doobie illustration, I made the background simpler. But these swords were a nightmare. They have such an intricate design, and it challenged my non-existent perspective skills to rotate them. But I didn't really want to spend much time on them anyway, so I moved on. Approaching the 6-month milestone, I was desperate to evolve my art. Since I was making a 6 months video, I needed a good clickbait. But I did hit the jackpot on day 174. Laplus, my Hololive Kamiyoshi, had just released this cover song, and the cover art was amazing. So I wanted to do my own rendition of this Laplus. I was focusing specifically on lighting for this one because at that time I was inspired by Rolua's works and wanted to try out a more dramatic lighting. I applied what I learned from value studies, this time choosing to keep the main subject dark and the background light. I had a lot of fun drawing these light beams, which were important to light up her face, and I also really enjoyed drawing the moon and starry night sky in the background. So what could be improved here? Maybe the colors is a little indecisive. I wasn't sure whether I should lean towards saturated and bold or desaturated and subtle, and I ended up somewhere in between. There. I think the back part of the hair and face construction could be improved as well, but for a 6 months journey, I'm okay, fine. I'm pretty satisfied with it. Overall, I really like this one, and I think the lighting study is a success. But anyway, I moved on to day 180, where I finished this bay art, where I tried to imitate Mika Picasso style like on day 78. Previously, I thought I was pulling my punches with the colors, so this time I went all out. Maybe too all out. I also regret including these many brats. I spent hours trying to color them, and I ended up too tired to do the rest of the illustration. So I think their face and anatomy ended up being so-so. At least rotating these guys was a great perspective practice, I guess. But overall, I didn't really feel good for this one. After 200 days of studies, I'm going through what I consider my second training arc. I'm more convinced than ever that anatomy, colors, and lighting are 3 things that'll take me a lifetime to learn. I chose to focus a lot on learning how to draw the human body because I think drawing them correctly and expressively is really difficult. Sometimes my figures might look right, but it doesn't really convey the feeling that I wanted to convey, and I feel like that's more important. Frankly, so far I haven't made a full body artwork that I really like. Something always looks a bit off or just doesn't sit right with me, so I set that as my next goal. And I think my figure studies finally paid off on day 252 with this art of Botan. I had a clear pose reference to follow here, but I did have to compose the outfit. This was probably the first full body illustration where I felt that the body construction and gesture is quite solid. With one goal achieved, I spot another one from this art. The colors are very not good. It was as if I forgot how to color because my singular brain cell was focused on body construction. I was slightly discouraged by this because I felt that my coloring skills had downgraded from my previous art. But I held on because I know that progress is not a smooth climb. Because I thought the colors felt flat, I decided to go back and studied values again. On this one, I tried to use a gradient map just for fun, and it was surprisingly efficient. Satisfied, I tested myself with this Miyabi art, and I think as a whole, it's just okay. Though I do like the face, hair, and the color and values in this one, but not enough. So I followed it up with this Ollie art, where I tried to imitate Lam's style. I really like how the eyes and face turned out, and I had fun exploring how to make an angry expression, but the composition is subpar, and from neck down, it's not interesting at all. Regardless, I was pretty satisfied with this, specifically with the colors, and that was my original goal anyway. After those anatomy and coloring skill check, I went back to my more general goal, that is character illustration. I did splash art studies, paintings, expressions, men, these figure studies with more focus on perspective, rendering the skin, which was kinda easy for some reason, and rendering clothes, which was more difficult for some reason. Along with these studies, I kept practicing my weekly character illustrations. There's no really big improvements to highlight here, but I think there are gradual improvements, specifically in the values and colors, which I was happy about. On the other hand, figures in perspective looks to be a very long-term goal for me. So far, I think this Shiori art is my best attempt at drawing figures with heavier perspective, which isn't that bad, but it's a bit stiff because I didn't use any reference for the pose. I also tried to study my Yoneyama again with this Tavi art. I really like the expression and composition here, and I think the feeling is there, but obviously, the rendering is not quite as polished as my Yoneyama's. At this point, I felt somewhat comfortable with character illustration though. And that comfort is a sign that I need to try out something new. So I began to try out backgrounds. Now you know it's not my first time drawing backgrounds, but I feel like so far these backgrounds play a supporting role, which is fine when it comes to character illustrations, but this time I wanted to practice drawing scenes. And so this art of Mume is my first attempt at that. Not to be negative, but this one is really bad. There are a lot of shortcomings. Firstly, I followed a picture for reference, and then I thought, for extra challenge, why don't I try to change the lighting so that it's evening? But I couldn't find the proper colors and it sucks ass. Secondly, when looking at other artists' background art for references, I noticed that a lot of good artists are able to express the details in the background without actually drawing them entirely. But I wasn't sure how to do that. As you can see, there are a lot of unnecessary details on a lot of things in the background. It makes the illustration overly noisy or dirty. I'm not sure if that makes sense. Not satisfied, I tried again with this art of Gura on day 312, this time using a simpler background for reference. I focus on the colors, lighting, and composition. This time, I tried to apply proper lighting theory, that is, adding warm, orange peachy light balanced by cool bluish shadow which comes from the blue sky. At least, I think that's the theory. But I realize I'm still unsure on drawing characters that take up a smaller portion of the canvas. I just didn't know how much details I should draw, so I went with something simpler, making sure that at the very least, the body construction is solid. And I think overall this painting turned out great. I would say that this is my first successful full background artwork. And with that, as I've had my fill of background art, I tried something else that I did not expect to try when I started this journey. Remember these value studies earlier? Well, I plan to focus only on min-maxing one art style for this journey because I thought that would give me the biggest improvement. These studies sparked my interest in painting, so every now and then I practiced this style of painting. It's really fun and the process is refreshing as it's very different from my usual drawing process. I use minimal layers, often no sketch, just blocking shapes and using mostly this kind of square brush. Despite those studies, I've never really attempted to create a weekly artwork in that style. That is until day 319, where I used this photo for reference to create this art. I struggled a lot with the face and getting the colors right. Since I just used one layer for each part, every time I changed my mind about something, I needed to carefully repaint them. But I liked how this one turned out. And then this one started out as a study. I tried to leave the leaves more abstract. However, I think this ain't it. It's a bit too monotone and they don't make good shapes. I don't know if that makes sense. I did like the wood house background and the stony ground here, but the character is very Although I tried to use the same style as the Gura art from day 312, at a glance, it looks okay, but when you really pay attention to it, it doesn't look good at all. This one is more of a copy study. I like this one because overall it was actually kinda easy. I was surprised by how easy it was to portray this lighting scenario, but I think I could have pushed the darker tones in the main subject and foreground more. Getting the face to look right, however, was such a pain. This is a recurring problem on all my painting style paintings. Getting the likeness of the face is just so difficult. I don't know, am I alone in this or is this a common struggle? But overall, I'm satisfied with how this turned out, so I moved on. Still painting, I did these two background studies, this time really focusing on the backgrounds. I like how this one turned out. Normally, I'd spend more time drawing the character, but this time I focused way a lot more on the background. I tried my best to keep things simple, avoiding muddying the painting with too much details like the Mume art. And although I think this is cleaner and a step towards the right direction, I still think it can be more clean. This time I kept the colors fairly desaturated and actually pushed the darker values, which I was satisfied with. I think these dark and desaturated parts really highlight and support these brighter parts. The next step would be stylizing these studies instead of just closely following the reference, but that's a story for another time. In the end, I'm very happy I decided to at least try out this style because even though my skills aren't quite there yet, at least I've got one foot in the door, and that gave me the confidence to keep practicing painting in the future. The end of my journey was drawing near. I did not study a specific thing, I'm just trying new things here and there and practicing my workflows. These are my 2 experiments. I had no plan going into this one. I jumped right in, head empty. Just like the subject, I tried mixing my usual anime drawing style, and when it was time to color, I just balled with my painting coloring process instead of my usual coloring process. The experiment was fun, but the outcome needs improvement. I think the face shading is just too chaotic. These gradients are not clean or deliberate enough, nor do they attractively portray the facial features properly. You know what I mean. So I plan to soften it or blend them more next time. This one took me so long because I tried the overpainting method, which is merging everything into one layer every once in a while and just drawing on top of that. It's supposed to be faster, but because I changed my mind several times or spotted some mistakes that I have to correct, I spent a lot of time just doing that, correcting stuff. I can see how this process would be faster in the hands of a more capable artist because you don't have to think about the layers. Or maybe it's simply a skill issue. I drew my Kamiyoshi Laplus 3 times this month. I love the design for this one. I'm referencing it from this beautiful illustration link in the description. It gave me that early 2000s mecha, sci-fi, cyberpunk anime vibes, you know what I mean? And also I get to practice different materials at the same time. I really enjoyed rendering the outfit, hair, and these big ass shoes. So far, this is my most polished, full body art in my opinion, and I'm satisfied with how this one turned out overall. Just maybe the back hair could have been composed better. Right now, it's just a bunch of tangled mess. Then I went simple. Because the last one was rendered a lot, I tried to go with a simpler one this time. I always had a hard time drawing poses where the limbs are folded. Not to mention, I had to foreshorten the legs a little bit here. But I think this one turned out okay. I like the construction, shapes, and colors. Just maybe the backgrounds, especially the shopping cart, could have been more polished. And honestly, I really like Karasu here. Look at that angle, the perspective on that bird, beautiful. Finally, I focused on the face render with this practice. As I mentioned, after learning from this illustration, I plan to study a better face shading. So that was the focus of this practice. And in that regard, I think I accomplished my goal. I was very satisfied with the way the face turned out. The rendering feels soft, which was also helped by the lighting scheme. Side note though, the body construction is extremely lacking. In this case, I think the neck ended up too long, or rather, the bust is placed too low, which also made the right upper arm too short. I wanted to fix this, but I had already spent way too much time for this illustration, and the original objective was the face render anyway, so I let it go. And with that, suddenly I found myself in the final week of my 365-day journey. Before I drew my final piece, I realized that I haven't really made a proper tribute to one of my art goats, Ask Zie. So I drew Surtur, a character she designed from Arknights. In the end, I think the face and body are okay. The render is a little bit too dirty, and the hair is way too fluffy. And I only noticed this as I'm reviewing my art after day 365, but I really need to learn to simplify the back hair of my characters because they always end up too fluffy or messy and not in a good way. At first, I didn't plan to draw the background, but because I had time, I changed my mind. Problem is, while I have this for reference, I had to come up with a different background because otherwise her horns would be poking through the bed. How the hell does she sleep anyway? Overall, I think I strayed too far from Ask Zia's style. Maybe the lighting scheme is too middle of the road and the character render was overdone, while the background render was lackluster. Yeah, I think this one is a big fail, but I ran out of time though, so I moved on. Finally, at the end of my journey, I redrew the Regulus art that I made on day 14. Yeah, her name is Regulus, by the way. She's from the game Reverse 1999. I tried to keep the original pose, just zoomed out a bit more so I can draw at least half body. I also allocated roughly the same amount of time to draw this as day 14, which is 14 hours, so that I can compare the difference more fairly. I wanted to imitate the Reverse 1999 style, but it was way too complex for me. If I really wanted to learn that style, I think I need more time. For a 14 hours illustration, I'd say this turned out pretty solid. I like the facial expression and the pose looks dynamic enough. And this time, I think the ribbon and pin are proportioned better. I also like the rendering on the face and hair because for once, it's not too overdone. It's fairly clean compared to my usual render. However, you can kind of see that I ran out of time here. I didn't have time to polish the mouth, shoes, sunglasses, and I only noticed this after, but this side of the back. But because time was limited, I prioritized the more important parts. Overall, I'm satisfied with how this one turned out, and looking back a year ago, I didn't think I'd reach this point. So that's the end of my 365 days art journey. What do you think? Should I have done some things differently? As I'm recording this, it's been roughly 3 months since my day 365. I've been trying to keep up my art studies, but sadly since then I haven't been able to commit much time to drawing, and I haven't even had time to stream much either. Thank you to all of my viewers and supporters. I'll be back soon, so if you enjoyed the video, please support my channel by liking and subscribing, and stay tuned for more. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.